who are joining us from Brazil. We have translation in Portuguese, and you can probably see a little globe in the bottom of your screen. So when we have Tullio sharing his experience, please feel free to switch to Portuguese or English in your and choose your language that you prefer. With that, I will quickly open up and ask for a quick check on where on who you are in the audience. So maybe we can have a poll and see what sector do you represent. We're going to take about 30 seconds for this poll, so fastest fingers are preferred. Great to see a lot of architects and planners. A lot of nonprofits, research, great. We've got some city officials, always nice to have in the mix. A lot of academic, great. We'll give it another 5 seconds to finish the poll. It is really nice to see a lot of architect planners, urban designers, and the nonprofit represented here. We have some representation from the philanthropic world, from community members and early years workforce members. That's nice too, and some city officials. Great. And now quickly, just to get a sense of where your cities are in terms of how playable and child-friendly they are, we'll do another quick poll and give it another maybe 30 seconds for this poll. So the question is, how playable is your city or neighborhood? And of course, the option varies from very playable, getting better, so-so, which I would say in case seems to be the most popular option here, or not at all. And we'll give it another maybe 10 seconds for this poll. So-so seems to be the most common answer here. That's interesting. And getting better, that's always helpful to know that there's hope and we're working towards it. But it's also sad to see that very, or like the most option is pretty much the lowest. So anyways, I think that really sets up the stage here. And without further ado, Daryl, I'd like to invite you for starting the conversation with Tim. So all yours.
Oh.
Daryl, I'll have to ask you to unmute yourself. Great.
How's that?
Perfect.
Good evening. That's much better.
Good evening from Hanoi, Vietnam, and it's really a pleasure to be able to be on the call with so many people from all over the world about obviously a topic that's very urgent and important based on the number of people that have tuned in. First, just want to thank Ceci and the team at the Bernard Van Leer Foundation for having a vision a couple of years ago to make this book even possible. And it took some foresight to actually be able to make an investment. And now we're actually going to see the fruits of the labor. So Ceci and team at Bernard Van Leer and Urban 95, thank you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Tim, but he's somebody I've known for almost 2 decades. And in that time, he's always been looking ahead. And while the play work was being focused on, he was focused on policy at the city level, and then the state level, and then the country level. And then he focused on risk, and then he was focused on building political will. So I know wherever Tim is looking, the rest of us should be following and looking as well. So I was really excited when he began to talk about cities and how cities are built. And with that in mind, I want to get to talk about the book a little bit and welcome Tim. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, can you tell us why you wrote this book and what you hope it will accomplish?
Thanks, Al. And I just want to echo your thanks to Bernard Van Leer Foundation, everyone in the foundations. It's been, I would not have been able to write the book that I've written. I'm not sure I would have been able to write a book at all without the support from BVLF. And I think the Urban 95 program is amazing, and we'll talk more about that. But I guess I'll be honest, I fell into this area of children's play and mobility in the late 90s. It wasn't my passion. It was a job that I started to do, and it just got under my skin, that this realization about how children's lives have been changing over the last 2 or 3 decades. And I crucially, that sort of loss of what I call everyday freedom in children's lives, and the kind of freedoms that I really valued from my own childhood, and I know many of us value, but that I felt were just, underappreciated or ignored. And of course, the standard response to that is, oh, well, kids want to play, let's build them playgrounds. But I quite quickly realized that's just not good enough. It's not an adequate response. It fails on so many levels. I'm not saying playgrounds are terrible, but as the years have gone by, it became more and more clear to me that trying to influence the way cities are built, to influence transport, the planning of land uses, of housing, was the key to opening up neighborhoods in the city for children. And even though I don't have any background in urban planning or design, I just rolled my sleeves up and got stuck in, and I was involved in campaigning for child-friendly streets in the 90s. And even the work on risk that you mentioned just opened up those questions about how do we feel about children being out and about. So it was wonderful to get the opportunity. First, I should also thank the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust for funding a travel grant for me to travel to some of the cities that I was lucky enough to visit, and then Bernard Van Leer Foundation to visit some more. And then Reba approached me and said, do you want to write a book? So I said, okay, and here we are.
Nice. So you spent a lot of your time over the decades talking about child-friendly programming. How do we make sure that is delivered in a fair and equitable way when cities are very different in size, scope, rural, urban?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a question that I'd be interested to hear when we come to the panel, to hear the views of the folks from Recife and Tirana and Tel Aviv. It's hard, but it's vital to make sure that these programs are taken forward in an equitable way. And the reason it's hard is because this is a novel idea, but it's a very attractive idea. Who doesn't want to live in a neighborhood that's great for kids, right? So when you have an idea that starts to gain some interest, what happens? Well, you know, the people with influence and maybe some resources and some who know how to work the system can start making the case for their neighborhood. And so you quickly get into some of those problems around, you know, wealthier people, the well-connected middle classes, quite understandably wanting to see this in their own neighborhood. And I want that to happen. I want everybody to want to live in child-friendly neighborhoods. But if you just rely on that bottom-up, you know, kind of emerging action from residents and communities, we know what happens. The communities where, for various reasons, you don't have the wherewithal, that, you know, people are struggling to hold things together, maybe juggling 2 or 3 jobs or living in really poor housing. They're not going to find the time to get to the folks down at City Hall and turn up at endless meetings and banging the table and saying, you know, we want to calm the traffic. So you have to bake in, as a municipality, you have to bake in a focus on equity. And my book is really aimed first and foremost at municipalities and people who are working with them. I think this needs local leadership. Again, it's a different way of saying the same thing. We can't rely on local community action. That is vital, and we harness that. And I think most people who are working locally aren't selfish. They want to see these sorts of neighborhoods everywhere. But then the municipality has to actively make sure that funding programs, engagement, you know, the outcomes, the evaluation, all take into account disadvantage. And municipalities know how to do that. It's just making sure that it happens.
One of the things that Urban 95 is based on is the 95 centimeters being the average height of a healthy 3-year-old. And so making sure that the voice of the caregiver who cares for those toddlers are taken into consideration. How does your book address that there's infants and toddlers and their caregivers and there's teenagers, and what municipalities need is a strategy for all?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. And that perspective of the really young children and their carers, I'll put my hand up and say that that wasn't at the forefront of my mind when I started on this journey. And it's the work of Urban 95 that's brought home how important that is. And in my book and in my work, you know, I'm explicit that we need to think of these different groups of children, these different stages of childhood differently. You know, for instance, the travel patterns of a caregiver and a toddler are completely different from the travel patterns of a school-age child or a teenager. And of course, also different from your average commuter, which is the main focus of travel planning. So we need to build into our programs a sensitivity to these different age groups. So with young children, we know travel patterns are much more local. We know that the spaces where children play need to be more small scale and intimate. For teenagers, we know that their range, you know, their freedom to roam is better, but maybe not so much for girls. So there's a real issue around teenage girls. And we also know that for teenagers, the social life comes to the fore. So spaces need to have really generous sociable seating that recognizes the way that young people want to hang out together. So it's about getting some of those details right, and crucially involving and engaging directly with caregivers, even with young children and with teenagers. That doesn't mean asking them to come up with the designs, but it means making sure that we can see our plans through the lens of their experience, and be prepared to revise our plans in the light of what they're telling us.
Mm-hmm. Because we have so many folks from the architectural and planning community on the call, you mentioned travel patterns and the buzz of 15-minute neighborhoods or whatever it is, probably wasn't heard of 5 years ago, but all of a sudden it's really hit a button in a theme. How does the book address cars and, you know, the dual impact of cars,
Yeah.
both on terms of cutting off and restricting, and also the pollution that it does to the environment?
Yeah. I hope that the book will be a contribution to this wider, really lively, sometimes ferocious debate about the role of cars in cities, and that it will be, what it says is, you know, we have to recognize that cars and the car dominance is the single biggest problem, the single biggest barrier to giving children more child-friendly neighborhoods, for all sorts of reasons that I'm sure we're familiar with. They're dangerous, they're polluting, they take up huge amounts of space. The noise pollution is an issue in many areas. You know, there's no arguing with that. But of course, car dependence has been baked into cities for 100 years. And so it's going to take time and effort and a moral will to unwind that. And that's where I think my book can help, is saying that the moral case, particularly bearing in mind the climate crisis, inactivity and obesity, the moral case for shifting the balance away from cars towards walking and cycling, which are very child-friendly, that moral case is enhanced when we bring children's views and children's voices into the picture. And so you can take some of the heat out of these big fights that are going on in cities now by that act of bringing a children's lens in and saying, look, this is not just about guys wearing lycra cycling around on racing bikes. This is about kids being able to walk to school without fear of being run over. This is about, you know, neighborhoods not being poisoned by air pollution that damages children's lungs. And I'm seeing in the UK, I think the beginnings of that people are waking up to the fact that this focus on children helps. So for instance, with the idea of school streets. So these are, you know, streets that are closed that are outside schools and that are closed maybe for half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon. They're being rolled out in various parts of the UK, and they're being, on the whole, less resistant to those than to some other measures that have got less of a child focus. So I think, yeah, you could say urban planning has been a battle between children and cars for the last 100 years, at least in residential neighborhoods. And for most of that time, children have lost. But now I think we're beginning to turn that around. And I should finally pay tribute to NACTO and Keita's former colleagues at NACTO, who wrote the wonderful Streets for Kids guidance. I was so pleased to see that come out. In a way, that book coming out with all the design and policy and measures in that meant I didn't have to cover that material. It's there, it's free, it's a terrific resource. And I really encourage people to use it.
And I'm going to come to some audience questions if there are any, so please put them in the chat. Finally, Tim, your book is critical on purely participation-based, child-friendly city initiatives. What are your reservations?
Right. This is difficult. I know lots of good people who are hugely committed to engaging and involving children, and I believe it's important to engage and involve children wherever we can. But firstly, it's not enough. We've been trying the participation method for 20 years, and there's a pretty clear consensus. It's not having an influence on the built form of cities. It may be doing lots of other good things, but cities are still being built in very unfriendly ways for children. So, you know, we have to look differently. But I'd also argue that my approach, which focuses on children's lived experience, on their everyday freedoms and expanding their everyday freedoms, is also about children's rights. Ultimately, it's about offering and being clear about a substantive vision. This is what a good childhood looks like. And of course, whenever we ask children what they want or don't want in cities or neighborhoods, well, what they tell us is they want more freedom. They want to be able to see their friends more, to have more choice about where they go, to have more freedom to get around. So I think what I'm saying in the book is just relying on participatory processes as the vehicle, as the method for getting neighborhoods more child-friendly hasn't worked and won't work. We need to directly advocate on behalf of children to make that case in City Hall. And we can't expect children to come up with the solutions themselves. It's a point I made earlier. We absolutely need to recognize children's lived experience, and that's different for different groups of children from different cultures and backgrounds and ages and circumstances. We need to be sensitive to that, and that will be different in different cities. But we can't hand over the job of making neighborhoods and cities work well for children to children. It's our job as adults to step up to the plate and do that, you know, and have a leadership role.
I see some questions coming in. One of the questions is around risk and seeing beyond the playground, and having run Kaboom, where we were about building playgrounds, you challenged me on how not to make them KFC, kit, fence, carpet. How do we make sure we get play advocates to see beyond the playground and beyond KFC in terms of making an organic city where all kids can thrive?
I think we need to get adults to start by getting adults to reconnect with their own childhoods. And you've seen me do this, Daryl. I often in talks, the first thing I do is ask my audience to think about the kind of places they used to play as a child and their favorite places to play. People may have some views about that on this call. And almost without exception, the places people remember are, you know, natural places. They're places of freedom, of adventure. Yes, even a bit dangerous, and they're very, very rarely playgrounds. And so it's that taste of freedom that I want to start the conversation with. You know, what I'm arguing for is that part of what a good childhood looks and feels like is having a taste of freedom, having the chance to take some responsibility, to gradually get to know the world around you and the people around you. That can't happen if all you ever do as a child is get taken from one playground to the next. So in practical terms, there's still a place for playgrounds, but I want to see much more variety. I want to see a literal and a figurative loosening of the boundaries, so taking away the fencing where it's not needed, blurring the boundaries between what's a playground, what's a park space or a civic space or a natural space. I want to see playful invitations scattered throughout neighborhoods, and in more and less concentrated forms and in many and varied ways. And so I think that's a vision that once people hear it and they think back to their own childhoods and the value they placed on that freedom, I think people get it.
Well, Tim, we have a part 2 to this conversation, which I'm really looking forward to. But before I give up the mic, I sincerely want to just thank you for your contribution. And I believe that this book, who it's targeted to and how accessible it is, could actually be a sea change for how people talk about, see, build, and interact with cities, starting today, but certainly from this day going forward. So thank you for putting the effort into it, and thank you for all that you're doing to get the message out there. I know Ankita's got another poll question that we're going to go to before we go to the panel. So we'll tee that up and go to the panel after this of actual case studies on where you saw this taking place. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
All right, so for the next poll question before Tim takes over, the question is, what would help you do more to make your city into an urban playground? And Tim, you can probably summarize the answers better than me, so I'm going to stop here.
Okay, so I can't see the emerging poll, so I'll wait until we've got somebody who can show me the data and see what we get. And of course, there are maybe other ideas than the ones on the list, but just as a straw poll, you can probably guess. I would fly the flag for study trips, even if it's almost to the city down the road, right? Right now we can't go anywhere, of course, although we can in the virtual world. So maybe there's a virtual study tour mechanism that we can explore. There we go. So we've got, actually I have to say that the most popular one was the one that I chose. If there was a magic, like a recipe for getting the mayor's attention, then of course everybody would have it, and our lives would be easy. But I do think that is top of my list. How do we engage with mayors? Actually, that's and senior decision makers. That would maybe be something that we can ask the colleagues from Recife, Tel Aviv, and Tirana to think about. Can I just, before we go on to the second stage, which I will be facilitating, I just want to alert people to the fact that if you order my book right now or tomorrow, you order it from my publisher's website, so that's the Reba website, you will get an £8 discount. So that's about $12 discount. You need to use that code URBANP8 when you get to the checkout or your shopping basket. The sale ends on Friday. So I will stop sharing now, but maybe we can put that in the chat as well. Okay, so I think I'm now going to be inviting 3 people to join me in a panel discussion. They are from 3 cities that are all involved in Urban 95's program. They're all 3 cities that also feature as case studies in my book. I think we have Anuela Ristani, who is Deputy Mayor of Tirana. We have Tullio Ponzi, who is from one of the senior managers in the municipality of Recife. And we have Bosmat Sfadia-Wolf, who is formerly the sort of Urban 95 officer, but now I think has been promoted, if I'm not mistaken, within the municipality of Tel Aviv Yafo. Great, I can see you all. I think you've all got your microphones muted, so you might want to unmute them. And I'm going to ask each of you, start with a question that, can you each share with us your biggest success in taking forward child-friendly streets, public spaces and neighbours? I'm going to start with Anuela, then I'll go on to Bosmat, and then I'll go on to you, Tullio. Anuela.
Everyone, hi Tim, it's such a pleasure it's such an honor to be here for your book, and it really brings back memories to our child-friendly conference 1.5 years ago when you were here with us. And really for Tirana, I think it's a unique story because we started at a very low bar. And I think, no matter how low you think of your cities in terms of, facilitating child play, this was really low. It was so low that in a city of 1 million, there were 0 public playgrounds. There were playgrounds, obviously there were places where people would, set up a playground and you would pay. But there were 0 public playgrounds, which meant, open ones when people could casually go and attend and not have to worry about costs or entrance or safety. And so our goal, once we built the first one, which I think you have a picture of in your book, was to have 1 playground for each month we were staying in the office. And so we managed to have 48 of them after our first mandate, the first 4 years. And now I'm happy to report we have 63 of them with 4 more in the process. But that said, it's not, like you said, it's not just an issue of playgrounds. It's not just an issue of really creating play space. It's also an issue of creating space in which kids make their own play. You don't necessarily have to have the gadgets for it. And so the next thing was to create pedestrian areas, to create areas where they could, play on their rollerblades and on their bikes and just create their own play. And one of these areas is actually the central square of the city, which is the Skanderbeg Square, which is a super big and huge city center. It's funny that it used to be fully pedestrian almost when we were kids during communism because we had 0 cars back then. But then very soon afterward was transformed into this roundabout in which thousands and thousands and thousands of cars would go round every day, and basically you couldn't even cross, not play. And so now it's one of the best recreated areas where kids can just make their own play. And it's every afternoon, every evening, every summer, every winter, because there's a lot of sun here in Tirana. Is just a big play space. And the last project that I want to show you is what we've done with the cities for streets for cities, which is basically making sure that the cities that are close to schools, and this is a NACTO funded project, and with partners with lots of organizations in here. We're doing the first school where we make sure that the streets close to the schools are safe enough for kids once they go out or in the school for them to play in this recreation, in this time when they're waiting for their parents to pick them up or they're walking to their homes. And it's funny that you said how people get persuaded when you talk about kids a lot easier than if you're talking about big projects. And this is actually the case. We managed to, so our first ambition was to just limit the traffic for certain hours. And we managed to convince them not just to close the street completely for cars, but to also remove their very comfortable parking spots, which were basically, occupied for years and years and years. And, they could see the car that was there, nobody's touching it. And now they're parking on the street and they've given up all this space for their kids to just basically safely cross from the school to, their apartment building. And I could talk for this forever, but I just want to mention these three examples.
Fantastic. And I'd just say, I think Tirana is the poster child for a city that has seen children as almost a kind of symbol of the moral and ethical future of the city. That the children, and I've heard your mayor, Ariane Belliage, talk eloquently about this, that children don't have agendas, they're open to ideas, and that just this child is a symbol of the future moral and economic and environmental direction of the city. It's amazing to see.
Biggest allies for the most difficult policies.
Yes,
like
and in case people don't realize, I mean, you might think that your town or city or country has got some political, divisions, but believe me, they probably don't compare with what you find in Albania. I could talk a long time about my experience of being in that city, but there's a wonderful quote from the Princeton University research that says the focus on children helped to create a common ground that softened the rancorous tone of national politics. Anyway, let's move on. Bosmat, tell us what you feel was your biggest success in Tel Aviv.
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much, Tim, and of course, the Van Leer Foundation. Our biggest success, that's such a hard question. I was thinking about it because to just, to pinpoint one success, I think we are working on a process that had few successes on the way, but I could say that our biggest success was to create this change in perception of the city leaders. And of course, it evolved to many ways that our projects are being made today. But having the mayor and of course, all the decision makers asking themselves, what is the role of the city? What is the role of our urban environment in terms of child development? It's a question that was never asked before. And in terms of public spaces, is asking a question, how can we take responsibility of creating more playful areas for children and for young families? And I remember that to create this change in perception was to bring early childhood thinking about design. This was something that was not familiar. Usually early childhood was more connected to issues of maybe welfare or education, and bringing urban design into this field was something very unique. You mentioned, Tim, before a study tour. For us, it was a turning point. 3 years ago, we took some of our top decision makers from cross-departmental units in our municipality to Copenhagen. And I think there we found out we have so many heroes, local heroes, to create this change of what it means to become a great city for young children and their families. One of them was the manager of Parks and Gardens department, who was at the beginning maybe skeptical, but at the end became the hero. That after bringing him the tools, as you said, he saw the change, he saw the opportunities, he saw the value that could be added to everyone, not just for children, for everyone in the city. And he took it and he moved forward. And today it's already a perception that is being so well implemented that when we offer them, let's create a guideline, they say, we already know what to do, and we do it. And on the other hand, I want to say it's also, you mentioned top down and bottom up. It's very important. Of course, we started from top down. We worked with city leaders and we wanted to start with experiments, even using sand and water, which was something which was really an issue for us in Tel Aviv. It looks simple, but it was so unsimple that now it's already something that is being implemented in almost any playground in the city. And not just playgrounds, looking at boulevards, streets. It's thinking, what is the story of the child in Tel Aviv? How does his day look like? Where he meets children? How do they play? Where parents meet each other? And it's everywhere. Even here in the, this is one of our first sandboxes we created as an experiment that allows us to explore and allowing also the public to support these kind of moves. So I would say from the idea of bottom up, one of the successes is creating a demand from parents and from citizens in general. And once they see something that they want, they know how to ask for it. So creating better playgrounds with more playful opportunities for children, for the community, is something that I think if we want to measure its success, it could be, we can measure, of course, time, for example, of play between child and caregiver, but it's also measuring the, I would say, how much the public demand for it and feels it's something that they want to have in their neighborhood, near their home. And the municipality sees the success and want to have more and more and make it scalable, even not just in the center part of the city, but also becoming a standard for all parts, for other communities, low income, and etc. So this was our, I think, in a short answer, one of, I think this is where our biggest success was.
Great, thank you. And I would say my sense was that Tel Aviv went further faster than almost any other city I looked at. I know it has the reputation, it's a municipality that gets things done. And so, and I remember being at that session in Copenhagen, and almost I could feel the former head of parks. I could feel him moving and say, okay, I get it now. We'll do this. We can do it. And of course, the context in Tel Aviv and in Israel was important, with huge protests about standard of living, about housing costs, about just young families feeling under supported. And I think that was part of what fueled that community appetite, I think. Let's move on. And thirdly, I'm going to turn to you, Tullio, and ask you the same question. So what do you think was your city's biggest success in this space? And I'll invite people to switch, English speakers to switch on their English translation at this point.
Sim, é um prazer enorme estar aqui hoje com você. É um dia tão especial, não só para você, mas acredito para todos nós que acreditamos na cidade feita para as crianças, repensada sob a perspectiva das crianças. Cumprimentar aqui também Cecília, Daryl, minha amiga Cláudia Vidigal, que está aqui à frente dos trabalhos no Brasil, da Bernardo Vali, todas as cidades aqui no Brasil que vêm cuidando, que vem tendo essa atenção, tem colegas aqui participando de Jundiaí, de Niterói, de Caruaru, de Boa Vista. Eu acho que é uma pauta, uma agenda que cada vez mais ela se consolida, e o Urban 95 tem um papel fundamental nisso. E eu poderia dizer para você aqui como um fator de maior sucesso, e você esteve aqui conosco em 2019, que de repente poderia ser o patrocínio político, a decisão política que o prefeito Geraldo Júlio ele teve no sentido de priorizar essa ação. Você pôde presenciar aqui um dia onde vários secretários da Secretaria da Educação, Secretaria de Saúde, até a Procuradoria Geral do município, a área de finanças, todos estavam envolvidos e coordenando cada uma secretaria, uma comunidade, de forma simultânea para levar essas intervenções. Mas, para mim, eu acho que o fator mais importante foi o protagonismo comunitário. Eu acho que o protagonismo comunitário, que ele foi cada vez mais se despertando aqui no Recife, ele foi fundamental. Ontem foi muito interessante, Tim. Eu fui fazer uma visita numa comunidade, a pedido da gestão, para a gente começar a fazer uma nova intervenção no espaço. E me deram como exemplo um espaço lá onde tinha muito lixo, rato, era um lugar muito bagunçado mesmo, sem nenhum tipo de zeladoria urbana que já tivesse chegado ali. E Túlio, pensa alguma coisa. E aí quando eu andei um pouco pela comunidade, eu vi na mesma calçada, um pouco mais na frente, uma pracinha, um jardim, feito pelos próprios moradores. Iniciativa deles. Inspirado nas ações que a gente já vem fazendo cada vez mais nas comunidades aqui na cidade. Então, quando essas ações começaram aqui, né, e claro que chama atenção a beleza das comunidades, né, as comunidades, o colorido, né, as intervenções, quando a gente visita, vai observar as crianças se apropriando do espaço público, né? Eu digo muito que aqui no Recife, o direito de brincar na rua, na frente de casa, ele está começando a surgir. É algo muito importante a gente ver as mães com os bebês convivendo no espaço público. Mas o que me chama mais atenção, e se eu fosse poder destacar a grande inovação que surgiu aqui, foi no jeito do cidadão exercer a cidadania. Porque o programa ele vem no momento onde tinha uma aversão muito grande, como em outras cidades no mundo, né, do poder público com o cidadão. E a gente conseguiu fazer com que o cidadão aqui ele pudesse cobrar, reivindicar, mas cada vez mais querer ser parte da solução, ao ponto que as crianças também passaram a participar de todas as discussões do planejamento urbano da sua comunidade. Então, acho que esse foi o fator de sucesso, Tim. Se eu pudesse resumir uma frase, eu acho que a gente conseguiu desenvolver um modelo aqui onde o urbanismo social ele passa a ser uma estratégia não só de redesenho do espaço urbano sob a perspectiva das crianças para as crianças, mas acima de tudo o urbanismo social ele passa a ser um instrumento ou uma estratégia, melhor dizendo, para a gente promover uma forma de democracia colaborativa, ou uma cidadania ativa. E isso a partir do bairro, a partir da rua, a partir da própria comunidade. Então é algo muito bonito que vem acontecendo aqui na cidade. E eu acho que o fator chave para isso tudo foi o protagonismo comunitário, protagonismo das crianças, protagonismo das pessoas.
Great. Thank you, Tullio. And you've reminded me that, so one of the programs that I think you ran was the More Life in the Hills program. So this is focusing on improving favela neighborhoods, some of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. And that two things really struck me. One was that you realized that you weren't originally focusing on children, you were focusing on sorting out the infrastructure and the refuse, but that I think you made one playground in one neighborhood and you realized that kids were coming from far and wide to get to that space. And the other thing that struck me was, of course, the municipality could only run that program in so many neighborhoods. You couldn't do it everywhere all at once. But then you found that some neighborhoods were coming together on their own to do their own version of More Life in the Hills, that they could see the success of the program. And I mean, that's a tremendous appetite for positive change. And of course, I also really wanted to visit Recife and include Recife in the book to show that this is not just a nice to have. This is not just a kind of rich city initiative. Children everywhere deserve good places to play. They deserve to be able to walk to school safely. Their caregivers deserve to be able to take them to health services without fear of harm. And Recife, I think, shows that that is not just a powerful vision, but it's entirely possible and practical to do something about it. Thank you, all three of you. I'm going to now, I've been looking at a couple of questions that are coming through in the chat. I apologize, I haven't read all of them, but I'm going to just pick a couple and ask each of you to answer these questions. So one is about the enablers and the constraints at the policy level. So what are the things that the policy issues that have helped you make progress, and in particular that have helped you to mainstream the issue? I'm going to start again with Anuela, and then Bosmat, and then Tullio. So if you like, the policy context in your city that you hooked onto with this agenda.
So for us, the making cities more playful was basically making them more livable. The idea that you create space for kids, we all know it's not just about the kids. it's mostly about the adults. It's mostly about the parents. It's mostly about people who are the caretakers, and they struggle with safe and healthy ways for their kids to grow better, or to spend their time better. And enabling this performs much better in terms of quality of life for the grown-ups. And I will give you examples. Some of the playgrounds that we did, especially the ones in the neighborhoods, if you check them out, there are at least as many adults in these spaces as there are kids. And the adults are not there necessarily to play, they're there to interact. And especially during COVID, this was lifesaver. This was basically, people would go insane if these spaces were not there. If instead of playgrounds below your apartment building, they only had parking lots, or very erratic types of terrain where you basically had no safety or no playground to play with. And so have grandmas and grandpas interacting, and so it really helps all of the community. And in terms of the larger policy framework, we actually explain this and drop this down on the very basics. We have to improve the quality of life in the city. We have to improve the quality of air. We have to improve the quality of spaces. We have to improve the whole coexistence with each other. And by starting with projects that are that involve kids, or affect kids, or relate to kids, then you get a lot of other things done. For example, planting trees is not necessarily something that you do for kids only, but by having them involved into planting a tree for your birthday, or planting a tree for your teacher, or having a group project as a class to plant a tree, that's the message that you give of having everybody being involved. And the same way that you persuade adults to give up car space for their kids, or give up parking space for the bike lanes, that's the whole things get into the synergy of the vision that you want to create for the city. You want to create a city that is livable for all. And if that works for kids, it works for everybody else.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to move straight on to Bosmat and then Tullio, and then I'll see if I can slip one really short question in after that. So if I could ask for your answers to be quite short, Bosmat and Tullio.
Yes, of course. I tell you, I think this question is really interesting.
Oh,
because,
Bosmat,
yeah,
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me now? Can you? No?
No, I'm going to.
Tim, it might be you, because we can hear Bosmat.
Oh, okay, carry on.
Okay, sorry. I think that I can tell you from our experience, okay, what we did in Tel Aviv. I think there was an idea. I think what was our strategy that worked well was not to start from a policy of a strategy for early childhood, and to come with it when we came to Tel Aviv 3 years ago with a program and start to implement it. We work differently. We said, okay, I'm gonna look for opportunities where I can affect the way that the city works. And by this, I mean that any field that is on the table, I'm gonna bring the early childhood perspective to the table and try to work with the existing budget, the existing work plans, and there to create the change and impact. This is how we created small successes, quick wins. It started from experiments, moved to pilots, and now we are at this stage where we're working, for more than 3 years in Tel Aviv. We're looking at more sustainable tools, such as design guidelines, and just now we're starting to work on strategic planning for early childhood in Tel Aviv. But our starting point was really to be able to be everywhere and affect any decision that is being made, and to influence any work plan and any budget that is already existed and on its way to create change. So this is the way we worked, and I think it helped us now to create more policies after 3 years of working in that methodology.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to move straight on to Tullio and ask the same question. So what were the policy enablers and the things that the bigger strategic issues in the city that helped you make progress? And
O maior desafio, Tim, do Recife enquanto cidade, eu diria até do país, né, é a desigualdade social. Quando a gente olha para o território da cidade do Recife, né, a gente observa a desigualdade socioespacial de forma muito marcante. Nós temos quase que 67% do nosso território é formado por morros, com mais de 6 mil áreas de risco de deslizamento nesse território. São 545 comunidades de interesse social espalhado por essas áreas. Então, esse é um grande desafio que nós temos. Então, quem vive nas periferias sabe dessa realidade, a ausência de infraestrutura urbana, seja de uma barreira em risco de deslizamento, seja a ausência de saneamento, às vezes um corrimão na escadaria. Então, é um desafio do ponto de vista de presença do poder público e de qualquer serviço para chegar nesses territórios. Imagine da infraestrutura urbana. Veja, quando a gente vai comprar um apartamento, vai morar, vai se mudar, vai para algum lugar, uma das coisas que a gente pensa logo é onde é que vai ser no apartamento o playground, né, dos nossos filhos. O prédio tem, a casa tem espaço para eles brincar. Quando a gente vai e anda nas periferias, né, às vezes o que resta é um bequinho, um beco, uma rua muito apertada, uma escadaria, e só tem aquele espaço. Se não for assim, a pessoa vai ter que andar quilômetros para ter acesso a algum espaço de convivência, de lazer ou qualquer outro. Então, esse é um grande desafio. Então, o programa Mais Vida nos Morros, que é a principal política pública aqui do Recife, que trata da desigualdade socioespacial, ele começa inicialmente com uma estratégia de defesa civil. A ideia da gente era que o morador preservasse mais sua comunidade, que ele cuidasse mais dela e que ele fosse um grande agente de resiliência da sua comunidade. Sendo que a gente percebeu que o programa era muito mais do que isso, né? Exatamente por essa ausência, né, e por essa oportunidade de transformar os microvazios urbanos nas periferias. Então, o programa ele passou a avançar nesse sentido e hoje eu acredito que, em contraponto, né, às soluções tradicionais da urbanização das favelas, né, que são soluções que talvez a gente vá levar talvez séculos, né, de investimento para poder resolver. Eu acho que o Recife hoje tem, e a Bernard Van Lee entendeu isso e nos apoiou na sistematização do modelo. Nós temos hoje uma alternativa de política pública de altíssimo impacto, baixo custo, implantação rápida, e que ela certamente pode ser escalada de forma universal em um mandato ou em 2 mandatos. Eu não estou falando de 2 séculos. Então eu acho que a gente tem uma alternativa hoje para essas gerações.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tullio. I will be handing over to Cecilia Vaca-Jones in 1 minute. I just want to share one more page from my presentation because I think it captures something that's really important about all 3 cities. Let me just show the diagram here. Oh, here we go. This one. So this is a hub and spoke model. This is the model that I think all of the cities that I looked at, the most successful cities, had at their heart was a municipal official. We have 2 examples on the call today. And actually, Anuela, of course, you used to be chief of staff in the mayor's office as well, who was the hub, who was at the center of the action in all these different functions across the municipality and with other partners as well. And I really think that that is the stepping stone. That's the key that unlocks action at the municipal level. And that's a diagram that's in my book. Now, we're approaching 2 o'clock. I thank you so much, Daryl, Anuela, Tullio, Bosmat, Bernard Van Leer Foundation. I'm just going to invite Cecilia Vaca-Jones to just say a few closing words on behalf of the foundation.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, everyone. It's always inspiring to hear you, but I do want to highlight the fact that I think almost 4 years ago, you and Daryl and me were having coffee together in Rotterdam. And I remember that this book was just a starting project. And Tim, thank you so much for being such a great advocate for doing designing cities differently so we can really improve the way that young children are growing and every different single city around the world. I do want to raise one phrase that you mentioned, which was through this book, you want to give people a taste of freedom. And I was really shocked when I listened to this, because I think I've always been very inspired by the work that you do and the advocacy work that you've been doing all of these years on just like really trying to find the right arguments and the right practices and showcase which are the best practices of how having more urban playgrounds can really help families and children be raised in a very different way. But of course, listening to Anuela, Tullio, and Bosmat, and I've been very lucky to visit all of the cities, but also just testify all the work that you've been doing during this last 4 years, which is almost the same time that Tim was writing the book. So for me, it's just so amazing to see these very strong leaders talking about the transformation of cities and what you can do. And of course, Darryl, you've always been a dreamer together with the Bernard Van Leer Foundation on how we can really enable cities to become better places for human beings to live. And I'm very inspired today, so I just want to say thank you again. Tullio, I get your words, and hopefully we can do more social urbanism and really make sure that when we're thinking about designing cities and planning cities, we can also think about closing gaps and promoting more equity in every single city we work in. And play and having more access to safe and healthy places to play for children is definitely one of the aspects that we need to focus more. So I think more than 300 people have joined today. Tim, this only speaks for yourself and what a great advocate you've been for this topic. So thank you again, and thank you all for joining today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Sissy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So here's what the book looks like. I should have, there it is. Here's a page on Fortaleza, lovely work in Fortaleza. I wanted to just give them a heads up as well. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's keep up the good work and get this rolling.
Congrats,
Bye-bye.
team. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.